Greetings. Welcome back to CS195 Web Development Week 10 DOM Events. We are on adding an event listener. We finally made it. This is what we've been waiting for. Now you can actually make your web page interactive. Click on something and then it will change something. So all the stuff we learned to change, we can now make it so when you listen to something, click on something, hover over something, whatever you're trying to do, and then it will actually change based on that. So our objective is to understand how to add an event listener to an element. Our success criteria is you will demonstrate selecting an element to listen to and then change another element's style when you click on it or whatever you're listening for. So we'll go ahead and watch the con video and then we'll test this out together.
I've set up this plain web page for us to play with, and it is rather boring indeed. It has no content, and this button does absolutely nothing when I click on it. Let's make the button interactive. When the user clicks on it, the text inside the button should change. The first step is to find the element that we want to listen to events on. And in this case, that's the button, and the button has an ID of clicker. So we'll create a clicker button variable and use document.getElement by ID to get it and store it in that variable. The next step is to define a function that will be called once the click event happens. I'll call it onButton click, and I'll just put my empty function, and of course I need to put something inside of it or it's not a very exciting function. So to change the button text, we can use the clicker button variable and set the text content of it. Oh wow, you clicked me. Yay, what a happy button. It's not much code, but we can make it more complicated later once we get this working. All of our code has done so far is define variables. So still, nothing happens when I click the button. The final step to bring it all together is to tell the browser that it should call the function we defined whenever the click event happens on the button that we found.
And I'm going to show you, and she might even do, a slightly different way to do this. You don't need to create functions this way. You can create functions this way. Also, this is probably one of the times I do almost always add event listeners all in one line. I don't do them in two. However, you can see in this case she was going to go ahead and change the content of it anyway. So in this case, it kind of makes sense to have the clicker button because now she can change this context and actually add the listener. But what I'm going to do most of the time is you're going to just do it all in one line for what you're working with. But this is kind of, and the order doesn't matter. A lot of times I will add the listener and then create the function because I do it all in one line, not like she's doing. We'll go over all the different methods of this, but the bottom line is you have to create a function. No matter what you do, you have to create a function because it's just going to sit there. And we took functions in other programming classes, Python. Again, it gets called later. Functions by themselves do nothing. They're great for two things. Holding code that you can execute over and over and over again without needing to type it a bunch of times. And two, just storing the code until something happens. Those are the two big things. And this is a great example of the latter.
We can do that by calling the add event listener on the button element. Clicker button dot add event listener. And we need to pass two arguments to.
And this is new for what we learned so far. So far we've always sent one thing, right? You're always inside the parentheses. Clicker, the ID, whatever you're doing. But there's two things it needs to know. And it makes sense. You have to tell it what you're listening for and then what you're going to execute. So again, what are you listening for? A click, hover, button press. What are you listening for? And then what are you executing?
This method. The first is the name of the event, click, and the second is the function that we want to call when the click happens, on button click. Now, pause this talk through and click.
There you go. And then since it's doing, every time I click this, it is actually changing the contents of this. And we could do a console log on this if we were so inclined. And this would show up in the console every single time we ran the code. You can see it just, the number goes up every single time I click it. So that's console.log. Again, we're in a web page inside a web page, so we're getting all kinds of other errors. But if you remember back from our troubleshooting or debugging, this is super important.
The button. Did it work? I hope so. It worked for me. Let's talk more about how this function works, because it is a bit tricky. We call this function the event listener function, or the callback function, because that's the way we use it. We only want it to get called once the event happens. We usually don't want it to get called when the page loads. If we did want it to be called when the page loads, we'd have to add a line like this at the bottom. Notice the parentheses after the function name here. Remember, parentheses is how we call a function.
Alright, so see, this one does not have parentheses because you don't want it to call it then, right? You want it to call it when you click, and then it'll come and call it. Whereas right now, you do want it. You want it, in this case, you want it to run as soon as you start the program. So there are a lot of times where you'll want some things to run, resetting and whatnot. But again, if you get too much into this, you might as well have just set this text to, oh, wow, you click me, if you're calling this right at the beginning. But there are times, especially if you have like set timeouts, well, you'll run this stuff right off the bat.
If we leave them off, then we're not calling the function, we're just referring to it. And that's what we're doing when we pass it as an argument here. We're just telling the browser, hey, here's the function that you should call later, but not now. So make sure you do not put parentheses after the function name here, because then you'll just be passing the return value of the function, not the function itself. If I did accidentally do that, I'd see the button text change on page load and not see any change after. To fix that, I just remove the parentheses that I accidentally added, and now my function only gets called on click. One other way that we could do this is to pass an anonymous function to this method here. An anonymous function is one that does not have a name, and that's just specified in line. I'll copy and paste the add event listener line and show you the options side by side so you can see what I mean. I'll delete the function name here and replace it with the function definition itself, just pasting this in here. Okay, so these two lines of code are doing exactly the same thing.
Now, I want to point this out because I do use this feature quite a bit. So say you have arrows or something, right? So if you click on this arrow, you want it to say up, you want this one to be left. So instead of creating all kinds of different up, down, left, right functions, which kind of do all the whole thing, what you can do is, and we'll get further into programming these later, but you can still call this on button click. Right? I can still call this on button click, and we can send parameters to it, so like direction. All right, so if there was 4 different buttons here, you could go ahead and change the direction of what you're trying to do. And then what they do is, in this one, dir, and you could use whatever, if you click up, it can send up, right? So in this case, I'm going to say, pretend that, oh, that didn't work. I'm going to pretend that this is the up button. So when I click the button, it runs the on button click, it sends up, which is dir, and then you can use dir to say, okay, move the character up, or execute this if up, right? So we're not getting a whole bunch into programming right now. A lot of this is just to show you what you can do to change the screen. As we get into more advanced web dev, we'll get into all the different things you can do with this. But that's how you run it. If you wanted to actually send what she calls an anonymous function, is where you write the whole function inside of the thing, right? That's kind of the concept behind this, is you write the whole entire thing in front of it. So we'll let her finish up, and then we'll try this out.
Well, almost exactly. They're both passing in a function with the same code inside. The difference is that the first one is passing in a named function that we defined above, and the second one is defining the anonymous function inline at the same time as passing it. Both techniques work. Many developers prefer named functions because the code is easier to read and it can be a bit easier to debug, and
you can use this code other places. So, and most of the time when you you write code for a button, you're probably only going to want to do it on the button. But there are times where this code could be useful other places. So if you were to add it every single time to here, it's gonna add up, right? So if you have all the up arrows going and each one of them has all the code inside of it, then it's going to be a lot more. Whereas a lot of times you can write some few if statements and be able to process all of the code with one function, which is where you start getting more advanced. You start being able to do some of that with your code.
And you can call the named functions yourself at other times or from other events. But it's up to you what to use. Just don't use both at once, because then the browser will end up calling both functions when a click happens, and there's no point to calling this function both times. I'll go ahead and delete the anonymous function version since I prefer the first way. There's a lot that you can do now that you know how to add event listeners. You could add them to more parts of your page.
I'm going to rewrite this function real quick for what I'm going to teach you, so you can kind of see that so when we get there. But this will do exactly the same thing. So what you do is you do function, and then you give it a name. This does exactly the same thing. I can still call it. I can do everything. So this is normally how I write my functions. You can see I click on it. It still works. And this is what I'm going to show you in a little bit. And again, same concept. You can put all of this into one line. So really, all that code that she did could be in these two lines. Normally, and I'm going to show you, I do this first. What that does mean is you have to name your function here. Like, okay, what am I going to name my function? And then when you create the function, I think this is a lot easier way to write it. Just function, name a function, parentheses, squiggly brackets. Oh, you don't need that with this. So this is normally how I do mine. Again, we're going to do that right now, but I wanted to show you real quick how this looks. So let's go back to Trinket, full screen this, make it so you can read it. All right, so we have all of our same things, our best web page ever. We're going to make it better. So we're going to get the picture. All right, so let's get the picture. And let's go ahead and give it a var for now. So var, oh right, we're gonna do the thing, right? So we're gonna listen for the picture, right? So document.get element by ID. All right, and we want to listen to the good pick. So its ID is good pick. So we type in good pick. Dot add event, still camel case, listener, parentheses, again, two parameters. First thing, what are you listening for? And this could be on hover, on click. We're going to do on click, so they actually have to click on it. And you got to spell everything right, comma, and then the name of the function. We're just going to call it change pick. Again, no parentheses yet. We don't want it to call it now, but now we have a listener. If we click on it now, there'll be errors in the console log because like there is no function called change pick. So what we're going to do is go ahead and then create the function. So remember, this is the easier way for me. A function, the name of the function, we just called it change pick, right? So again, this is where everything needs to match up. Parentheses, squiggly bracket, enter. It automatically will close it for you. Double check our function we're listening for is change pick. Check. We call this change pick. It was also highlighted. You saw that. So we know it's spelled the same. Good pick. Good pick. Good pick. All right, we're looking good. So now we can do what we said. We're actually going to get this as well. So we already have things. We're going to var pick L equals. We already have the code for this. So we can listen for it. Now, the other thing we can do here is I could also replace it with pick L now. Anyway, there's so many different ways to do this. As long as you have everything correct, it will work. So change pick. If you remember how to change it, we have pick L dot src equals quotes. And then I believe I have a picture down here for us to use. So I'm going to paste that into there. And now, same concept. We have the listener, and it's going to run this whenever we click on it. And just like that, it works. And we could do so much more. We could listen to, or we can add to the demo. So if I enter, we could say remember the demo has nothing in it, so let's go ahead and document.get element by ID. Don't forget you can pause at any time to type and then start playing. And then demo was the ID, and we're going to do .inner HTML equals. And here's the beauty. Remember everything we did before? As soon as we typed it, it happened, right? As soon as we typed it happened. But because we are inside of this function, until the function's called, it won't actually do anything. So let's go ahead and put an H1 in there. I changed the pick. Yay me. Alright, and don't forget to close your H1. And now we click on this. I changed the pick, yay me, and the pick is changed. And you can just keep on going with this, doing all kinds of different things for that. You can also show and hide. If we wanted to then hide the other picture is called last pick. So let's go ahead and work on that. So again, document.getElementById, by ID, last pick. Now this is a style, right? It's a display is a style. That's what we're going to use to hide it. So style dot display equals none. So we're just kind of reviewing what we've done so far. You can just change all kinds of things. When I click on this, it makes that picture go away, change the picture, and that's a lot of the stuff that you can do by keep adding it. But if we review it, you got to add the event listener. So document.getElementById dot add event listener, click change pick, and then we have to create the function change pick. And if you remember, she's saying you can also call this later. However, if I do this now, it's going to run right away, right? So clicking doesn't do anything because it. Now, there is code. We're not going to go too much into if statements, but you can program it so if it's this picture, change it to the other one. So when you click it, it just changes back and forth. There's a lot of stuff you can do now that you can listen for events, right? Now you can start adding your actual code to it and or change stuff. So that is the end of this lesson. Go ahead and do your practices, your con challenge, journal entries. There's more information on this, and we'll see you next lesson.